So one thing we can say about the Chinese Communist Party is that it has doubled in size since '89, even though the population has increased by about 1/3, right? So the growth of the party is greater than population growth.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Xiaobo Lü, and I'm associate professor of political science at the University of California at Berkeley. And on behalf of the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations, it's a great pleasure to be here today to discuss an important new book by Professor Martin Dimitrov, who holds the Livingston Family Chair in Political Science at Tulane University. So Professor Dimitrov is a leading scholar of authoritarian politics. He has published numerous books and articles on how authoritarian regimes survive, adapt, and ultimately transform. And his 2023 book, Dictatorship and Information, has generated a lot of interest among scholars and policymakers. But today, we're going to talk about his new book entitled The Adaptability of the Chinese Communist Party, published in the Cambridge Element series on politics and society in East Asia. This book makes a tremendous contribution to our thinking about how the CCP continue to maintain resilience in the face of immense challenges. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Martin Dimitrov.
Thank you, Professor Lü, for this wonderful and very generous introduction.
Yes, well, your CV just way too long to list everything. So you have been a leading scholar on this issue. So I think really nice. I think one particular unique aspect of your work is you bring a comparative perspective when we try to think about Chinese politics and the Chinese Communist Party. So I would like to start by asking you, maybe you can say a little bit more about what do you think in general the main threat facing single-party regimes in general, and the CCP in particular?
Thank you, Professor Lü, for this very excellent question, which introduces the main subject of the book. So in terms of the main threats, I don't think there's something that is very specific about China. The responses that China has issued to these threats do have Chinese specificities. But China is a communist regime, and like all communist regime, it is facing four main threats, I argue in this book. One threat is a slowdown in economic performance. Another one is unequal distribution of socioeconomic benefit. A third threat is in the ideological sphere. So communist regimes like to protect themselves from harmful ideological influences. And then the fourth and final threat, which in many ways is the most serious, is the Communist Party is too small in order to ensure penetration of society and in order to incorporate potential rivals. So these, I argue in my book, are common across communist regimes, but what varies is the capacity of communist regimes to respond to them and then the specific ways in which they respond, at least to some of these threats.
Yes, I think this is right into it because I think two out of three threats at least is what Chinese government's facing, the economic slowdown, and then there's unequal welfare distributions, not to mention other issues that they're facing. When I was reading your book, it's quite interesting that part of your book talk about how the CCP successfully respond to some of these threats in the past. But then at the end, you also alluded to, given the new challenges, it looked like it's going to be a rocky road ahead for the CCP to deal with the new issues. Maybe you can pick a couple of the threats, tell us more about why the CCP was being very successful in dealing with those threats in the past, and what you might see as the challenge right now might be something like this time's difference, or you're still confident that the CCP can, overcome those challenges in the long run.
Great. Thank you for that question, Professor Lü. My thinking about this has evolved a little bit since the book came out. It was published last December. And it has evolved in a way that has positive implications for the capacity of the Chinese Communist Party to continue to adapt. So let me pick one thread about which I don't talk so much, and that thread is socioeconomic discontent. I've recently been giving a lot of talks about cultural security and what the Chinese Communist Party does to protect itself there, and also about the expansion of the Chinese Communist Party. But socioeconomic grievances, of course, are a serious concern for any authoritarian regime and for communist regimes in particular. And what I argue in this book is that one of the main drivers of these socioeconomic grievances is the unequal distribution of welfare in China. And of course, the Chinese government has made great strides since 1989. This book focuses specifically on the adaptive responses to 1989. But responsiveness to socioeconomic grievances was significantly higher in the 1990s and in the early aughts. And then in the 2010s, responsiveness has gone down. So this, of course, is one indicator of limited capacity to continue to adapt to this very important concern that citizens have and a potential threat to the stability of the party. Now, in recent months, what I have been thinking about after the publication of the book is two different ways in which the party continues to innovate in this area. And one is this creation in 2023 of what is variably translated in English as the social work department or the society work or the work in society. I mean, there are different translations for this department. But what that department aims to do is it aims to ensure deep grassroots penetration, which involves recruiting new party members at the grassroots, but it also will take over the petitions work. And of course, petitioning is one of the ways in which the Chinese government is showing responsiveness to socioeconomic grievances. And in this area, there have been problems in recent decades. So this, for me, is an indicator of ongoing, very serious introspection, thinking, searching for ways in which the Chinese Communist Party can adapt. So this is one example from these various threats and also, the ongoing capacity of the Chinese Communist Party to respond to these threats by adaptive strategies.
Great. So it look like you're being continue adapting, especially given the rising information age, and they trying to use different channel to be responsive. But at the same time, I think for many comparators, also China specialists, have been thinking this question that, I mean, there's a lot has been long debate about how adaptive is the communist regimes in general and Chinese Communist Party specifically, right? Then the question always come up is, well, in some of the post-communist regimes or the communist regime fail to adapt and lead to the collapse. And the CCP looked like a cat with 9 lives, right? And after so many challenge and the near-death experience, they're always able to bounce back. So, and then you talk about in the recent month or years, at least last couple of years, they're trying to be more adaptive in response, be responding to petitions. So I guess my question here is, what are the key ingredients in the Communist Party that made them more adaptive relative to other communist or post-communist parties?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's also not an easy question to answer. So let me focus on what this short book is interested in. So it's interested in the capacity of the Chinese Communist Party to adapt to one specific event. And that specific event is 1989, both in terms of its domestic manifestations within China, but also 89 globally, which is when communist regimes, of course, collapse. And then China domestically is experiencing the most significant instance of upheaval after 1949. So for me, the question is, okay, so what was China able to do that other communist regimes were not able to do, and why? Which is also the question that you're asking. So it was obviously able to survive. But the reason why it was able to survive is that in 89, it successfully repressed this domestic upheaval, whereas other communist regimes could not do that. So what that allowed the Chinese Communist Party to do, the successful repression, is it gave it some time to engage in very intensive introspection, in thinking about the reasons both for the domestic upheaval, but also for the international collapse of communism, and then to draw some lessons from Eastern Europe, and then to apply those lessons specifically within China in order to implement these adaptations. So I talk about 4 lessons. One is about expanding the scope of economic activity, encouraging private enterprise, and so on and so forth. The second one is expanding the welfare net, socioeconomic benefits. The third one is protecting the party in the ideological sphere. One of the key lessons that the Chinese Communist Party drew about the collapse of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union is that it was a result of ideological laxness, or allowing these dangerous foreign ideas to enter the Soviet Union. And then the fourth lesson was about the importance of increasing the size of the Communist Party and enhancing the depth of its penetration in society as a way to both get panoptical vision of society, but also to control it and to incorporate potential rivals. So the short answer to your question about what is different about China is most immediately in '89, the successful suppression of the protests, which then gave it some time to consider the future and to decide on a road that was very different from the one in Eastern Europe, which involved political pluralism. And then, of course, that paved the road for a multi-party system and the end of communist rule.
Yes, I mean, 1989 definitely is a water threat moment. And that's one of the, I would call it the most serious challenge to the Chinese Communist Party in the post-49 era. So I guess, but if you give it a long view, right, 1989, it is a key moment of the Chinese Communist Party's the adaptability. But what about, say, 1976, right, the end of Cultural Revolutions, or even going further back, 1961, 62, post the Great Famines, the Great Leap Forwards, right? So they encounter, several disastrous policy outcomes in the past. But it looked like the adaptability is not always, quite there, right? Of course, in the pre-76, Mao's there. That's really dominate the political theme. So I guess if we take a long view, will you still fair to say that 1989 is just way more important than all the other events that I mentioned, in the post-49 era that made the CCP more adaptive, or this is a process, right? They've been adaptive each time, and '89 just the most recent one that really shaped the thinking of the political elites at the top.
Yeah, no, thank you for this question as well, Professor Lü, because it's very important. And the way that I think about adaptation is I think there are smaller adaptive episodes, and then there is massive and extremely significant adaptation. So for me, '89 is crucial. And it's crucial in 2 ways, because '89 presented a threat both to the Chinese Communist Party itself, but also to the single party model that it successfully established in China. And then I think there are previous episodes. There are also more recent episodes. So we can go back to '49. We can also go back before '49. And here I'm thinking of an excellent new book called Domination and Mobilization that you authored that just came out. So I don't know whether you agree, and we'll have an opportunity to discuss your book. But if one thinks about the struggle between the Chinese Communist Party and the KMT before '49, of course, the Chinese Communist Party is adapting. I mean, that's how I see it. But it has not established rule throughout China. It hasn't established a single party system. So then after '49, of course, there are multiple challenges. '76, as you point out, is, in my sense, one of the key ones because it is, yes, the end of the Cultural Revolution, but also the death of Zhou Enlai and then the death of Mao. So there the challenge is, how would this transition be carried on? And this, of course, is a big challenge for communist regimes, but it has not proven, and we have empirics on this, it has not proven to be the existential threat that many scholars feel it would be, because communist regimes manage to get through this succession problem. It's difficult. '89 was an existential threat to the stability of the Communist Party and the single party system that it established in China. So for me, that's why it's the most significant episode of adaptation in China's post-49 history. But of course, after '89, there have been other challenges. So if we look at it chronologically, I mean, in the late 1990s, there was Falun Gong, and then there have been, other instances, most recently, the COVID lockdowns and those protests. So and of course, if somebody looks at elite politics, they might look at other challenges. But '89 was system challenging, and it was existential in terms of the threat that it posed. Therefore, the adaptations had to be very deep, and they had to be long-lasting, which is one of the reasons why I'm interested in whether some of those adaptations are wearing off. And as I was finishing the book, I was finishing on a somewhat pessimistic note. But then in recent months, I have been thinking about the society work department. I have also been thinking about grid governance and what that allows the Chinese Communist Party to do at the grassroots, because it is a mechanism both for surveillance, but also for the delivery of public goods. And both of these are important mechanisms through which the Communist Party is ensuring its ongoing stability.
Great. So this is something that I've been thinking about a lot. I think you give a really good answer to that, because 1989 is in some way that really helped shape how the CCP become more adaptive. But early on, you talk about in the post 1989, the CCP realized they need to be more responsive, provide more social welfare to their layoff workers and in the countryside, and deepen the economic liberalization, right? And when reading your book, I cannot help but thinking that the reason that CCP was able to be adaptive during that time in the post '89 era is also because Deng Xiaoping's there, right? Because the conservative part of the elite of the keep pushing back, saying that, well, the reason 1989 happens is because we become too liberal, giving too much power, voice to other people. The CCP need to consolidate its power. But the 1992 Deng Xiaoping Southern Tour, right, set the tone that the CCP need to still embrace market and embrace the economic liberalizations. And also continue this path of collective leadership, right? And then the separation between the party and the state, let the bureaucrats handle economic policy and give local governments the ability to improvise, like Yuan Yuan's book to promote economic development. But in the last decade or so, we start to see the erosions of those key ingredients for China's economic success, right? We see the party become stronger. That instead of talking about the state's business relations, now there's talking about the party, right? Intervene and become insert itself in every aspect of the private and public lives of people, and also talk about this erosions of promoting private entrepreneurship, right? So I guess my question is that given those erosions, do you think, I mean, of course, it's hard to predict the future, right? But do you think now the key ingredients for Chinese Communist Party's ability are start to disappear, that may in the end cripple its very foundation for its adaptability in the near future, or in the years to come?
Yes, well, you are, of course, correct, Professor Lü, that predicting the future is impossible, but we all try to do that. And I, of course, myself am quite interested in what the future holds for the Chinese Communist Party and whether its adaptive capacity is eroding. So as I mentioned, I finished this book on a pessimistic note because I did note various problems, including in the economic sphere, the fact that the party has taken an aggressive approach towards platform companies and tech companies. Although, as I mentioned in the book, I mean, it seemed that as of 2023, this was ending, and now we have 2 more years of data, and it appears to have been an episode. So the Communist Party corrected its course in terms of its approach to the tech sector. And, there it was sending a signal. But that signal was quite costly because, of course, the trade-off was the more that you repress a certain sector or you constrain it, then that will have implications for economic growth. So, of course, that is something the party is mindful of. In the socioeconomic sphere, the concern, of course, is that there are vast inequalities in wealth distribution in China, and the welfare system, whatever it is, has various inefficiencies and also divergences across Chinese provinces, rural and urban, and then within the urban across various socioeconomic sectors. So extraordinary inequality. And even the existing rules and regulations in the socioeconomic sphere are inconsistently enforced, which is why this responsiveness to petitions and other grievances is so important. So there, of course, I mean, I did note that responsiveness is low, but let us see what the Society Work Department does and what grid governance, which has been around for about 2 decades, but it is being expanded in a very consistent way, with the idea that this will help with the delivery of various public goods, and also it will increase responsiveness. It will also increase the monitoring of the population. So, there, I mean, I think there's some, certainly attempts to shore up responsiveness. In the ideological sphere, what I have been quite interested is how the Chinese Communist Party is doing 2 different things. On the one hand, it is trying to stop dangerous ideas like democracy, the rule of law, and also investigative journalism from becoming widespread in China. But at the same time, it is also promoting domestic cultural production, which I call indigenous cultural production, so films, music, and such like. And then, the question is, how effective are these strategies? And I think when it comes to the Han Chinese majority, I mean, they appear to be quite popular, these moves by the Chinese Communist Party, also to promote traditional Chinese culture. Minorities, of course, are one segment of the population where it's not so clear how effective those strategies are in terms of incorporating them into a grand vision of the Chinese nation. So, there, I mean, I have, some concerns. And then, of course, finally, there is this issue which in many ways is central, and it is the Chinese Communist Party itself as an organization, and how large it is, how diverse it is, and how representative it is of various social sectors, and how capable it is of incorporating rivals. So these are separate but related questions. So one thing we can say about the Chinese Communist Party is that it has doubled in size since '89, even though the population has increased by about 1/3, right? So the growth of the party is greater than population growth. It has also been capable of penetrating very deep into society. And with this Society Work Department, it will keep penetrating even further. It has been able to penetrate into new sectors like the private economy and also social organizations. So these are all positive developments. At the same time, the Chinese Communist Party is getting older, so that has something to say about its vitality. It is also getting, I say it's more elitist because I find that fewer and fewer members of the Chinese Communist Party are workers and rural residents. More and more are various types of managers. And also the party now overwhelmingly is a party of university graduates, whereas the Chinese population is not. I mean, university graduates are not a majority of the Chinese population. So for me, these characteristics indicate that the party is changing in important ways. And then, what I'm concerned about is the party in private business and social organizations. I mean, there are 2 different ways why one might be concerned. The Communist Party itself is concerned that the penetration of these new types of organizations or entities is insufficiently broad. And it aims to continue to penetrate them in order to ensure that the great majority have party cells. But from a theoretical point of view, what one might be interested in is the capacity of private business and social organizations to challenge the party. And certainly if they have party cells in them, then that capacity is diminished. So I mean, the picture is somewhat mixed. When it comes to challenges like system critical intellectuals, the very few that are left, I mean, I think that is a question mark. And then another challenge for the Communist Party is minority penetration. And there, my sense is, based on the data that I've seen, that the party there's more work to be done for the Chinese Communist Party to ensure deeper penetration of these minorities. And then, of course, there's the question of Hong Kong. What is happening there? Obtaining data is complicated. But these are some of the areas in which more work remains to be done for the party. And this, of course, is from the point of view of the party itself. I mean, there is this whole question. It's a normative question. Is adaptability a good thing? And it's a good thing you didn't ask the question, and I'd like to probably not answer it, even if it's asked. But from if one is interested in how the Chinese Communist Party aims to ensure its survival, then adaptability is the answer. So it certainly helps us understand how this party has stayed in place for so long, whereas other communist parties have disappeared.
Great. So I think this is really excellent thinking about how the CCP deal with the recent rising discontent as well as in a way to respond to the people. But so far, I think a lot of issues that you've been discussing, I would call them, is how does the one-party regime or dictatorship control the masses, right? But another key component for the resilience of non-democratic regime in general is about resolving elite conflict, right? And as you know that I would say post 76, the CCP embraced a number of reform and initiated by Deng to promote collective leadership, separation of party states, in some way to manage different elite interests, and then they've underwritten social contract that to the economic elite is that I will let you to get rich, even get rich by illegal means, and then but at the same time, don't touch politics, right? Don't challenge me. So when I was reading your book, another question keep coming back to me is that what about the CCP's adaptability in managing elite conflict, both within the party, but as well as with the rising economic elites, right? So she gave a strong signal when Alibaba, the Ant Financial, tried to went public a few years ago, and because the founder Jack Ma gave some speech that really angered the party, and then that whole IPO got stopped a few days before. But of course, and also the crackdown of a real estate market, but then generate a lot of unintended consequences on the economic growth, and to the extent that now China, to some extent, entered the stagnations process. The real estate market is collapsing or has collapsed. And then the IT firm, I think the only bright spot is AI, right? But all the others, they're kind of tipping their toes and trying to see. Although she gave a speech, I think earlier, sometime last year, and actually hold this meeting, right? Welcome like a dozen to 20 leaders in the IT sector, talk about how the CCP want to embrace, private entrepreneurship in the private sector, and change his tone about the roles between the state and then the society and then the business elites, right? But still, if I were the business elite, I would be thinking, well, fool me once, and shame on you, and fool me twice, shame on me, right? And this critical commitment problem that, yeah, you need me now, but what if you don't down the road once the Chinese economy revives? So can you just say a little bit more about, I guess there's two questions here. First, in general, what do you think about the CCP's adaptability in terms of managing the elite conflict interest within the party? And the second is another dimension of elite politics is the conflict between political and economic elites. Where do you put your money, right? Think about the adaptability of the CCP on those two key aspects of elite politics in China.
Yes, thank you, Professor Liu, for these questions. As you know, since you know my work, I don't really do elite politics, but this is a fair question. I tend to focus on mass challenges in communist regimes. Let me start by answering the second part of your question, which is about economic elites. Of course, I mean, the steps that were taken in 2020, 21, and 22, I mean, this is when these moves started sequentially. You know, to us, they might look maladaptive. I mean, what exactly was the Chinese Communist Party doing? Essentially trying to kill the goose that is laying these golden eggs. But this policy was then relaxed. And of course, I mean, you're right that, I mean, these elites are exceptionally nervous. So the party sent a signal, a costly signal, but it was able to send it. So I think if we adopt a comparative perspective here, what the Chinese Communist Party is not experiencing is what happened in post-communist Russia in the 1990s when the billionaires literally moved into the Kremlin. So this is not happening in China. Of course, very rich entrepreneurs that are controlling big platform companies present a threat to the government. And we know this both theoretically and empirically. So the Chinese Communist Party, I feel, through these costly moves, was able to send that signal and to neutralize the threat for the time being. So I don't personally see a threat coming from business elites coalescing against the Chinese Communist Party. So that's in terms of how it manages the elites, the business elites. Within the party itself, there's a lot of research on elite politics. I feel that the fundamental problem that we face when we work on elite politics in China is that we don't really have that much data. So we do need to engage in a certain amount of guesswork. But of course, we have not seen since '89 a coup. In fact, we've seen orderly transitions. What does that mean in terms of the capacity of the current General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party to manage elite conflict? It appears that thus far, I mean, he is capable of doing that. Of course, you know, my sense, based on the types of anti-corruption prosecutions that have been executed for the last really over 10 years at this point, is that there's significant discontent amongst the elite. But the question is whether a sufficient number of the top party elite will be able to coalesce and to oust the incumbent. And, you know, I think the answer to that is we don't have evidence about this at this point in time. So my sense is that, of course, you know, things are not perfect, and the current leadership is, well, it's different, shall we say, from predecessors in the 1990s and in the aughts. But there is, from my point of view, no evidence of a significant elite threat within the party or from businesses. So both of
Yes,
those that far have been managed.
great. So I think this is really understand elite politics in China is sometimes reading the tea leaves. So there's so little data, so it's hard. And that's the nature of authoritarian politics. So I think I want to conclude this discussion by taking a broader perspective. I think for many audience, they've been thinking about globally how the U.S.-China relations, right, been going up and down, and has mostly been down and sometimes been up in the last few years. And not to mention the challenging global environment, right? And it looked like we're at a critical juncture where U.S.-China relations down in the next few years, and then the changing global environment is going to create a lot of challenges for the CCP to manage its economy, to manage its engagement with many developing countries. So I guess what's your thought on how do current U.S.-China relations and the global political environment shape the CCP leaders' ability to be adaptive, to respond effectively to those challenges?
Great question to end on. Also, given the fact that this talk is being hosted by the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations, this is an important question for our hosts as well. Absolutely, as you're suggesting in your question, the current tensions are putting stress on the Chinese economy. We don't quite know what the actual implication would be in terms of economic growth. There are different models, but there will be an impact. And this, of course, is one of the pillars of the adaptive resilience of the Chinese Communist Party. There's a consequence from any slowdown in economic growth, and that consequence is increased socioeconomic discontent. So, these two things tend to be related in most contexts, and certainly in the Chinese context. So those two, I think, are predictable. What we don't know is the magnitude. So certainly it presents a challenge. Thinking about the third adaptive strategy that I point out to in my short book, which is in the ideological sphere, I think the current tension actually might help the party because it gives it yet another type of reason to portray the United States as in various ways harmful to China. So, I mean, that is in the ideological sphere. In terms of party building, I'm not sure that it would have any direct impact. But yeah, certainly in the economic and socioeconomic, it will have negative impacts.
Great. So thank you so much for spending the time and sharing with us about many insights in your book and its broader implications. And I've learned so much from reading your book, and I think this is going to attract a real wide, range of audience who are interested about Chinese politics, U.S.-China relations. With that, I will give you the platform for your last words. What do you think? Next 5 years. Yeah.
My last words are thank you so much, Professor Lü, for reading the book and for developing these exceptionally thoughtful questions. This was a real pleasure to have this opportunity to speak with you. And I also want to thank our hosts, the National Committee on United States-China Relations, for providing us this platform for this conversation. Thank you very much.